King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, a weekly media commentary talking about traditional and digital media headlines and talking to the content creators out front and behind the scenes. Here is the King of Podcasts. Yes, it was only a couple of nights ago, but it needs to be talked about here on the Broadcasters Podcast, the Oscars. Now, I don't want to talk about the actual Oscars ceremony, but the overall result of the Oscars. Now, this commentary I'm going to give tonight has nothing to do with needing a diversity, equity, or inclusion narrative as part of who won the awards, the historical ramifications of who won the awards, and the movies that were doled out. It's nothing about that, because with the pandemic, it made it very difficult, and I just didn't want to go ahead and go out of my way to look for movies that were for your consideration and go looking for them on Netflix or Hulu or somewhere else. I don't know how many of those movies made it to streaming in time for people to go ahead and review it as an audience, for people to watch the movies that were good. And some of the commentary I'm going to bring up tonight will support that point. That's where I want to come from. Because the Oscars might have... There's a reason their ratings went so low. More than half the audience that would normally watch this event were not there. Now, part of it is we're still in this pandemic haze where everything needs to be socially distanced, and even though you could put security ramifications, you could put safety ramifications together, it's still... There's a narrative that needs to show that Hollywood still needs to act like we're still back in March of April 2020 for whatever reason. There has to be such a big proximity of social distancing, such a big amount of cognizance towards it. And then really a lot of sanctimony that comes across these shows when this Oscar ceremony should have really brought the people that won awards and those presenters and those that were involved. This should have been an opportunity, much like the Golden Globe should have been, much like any other award show should have been, a chance to reconnect with the audience. But Hollywood doesn't want to do that. Now, remember, there's a certain sector of the audience that will appreciate, but then there's another certain sector that won't. For the Oscars, there is no Broadway right now. There are no exhibitions of art or music or performance art that's out there for people to enjoy. The closest thing people can go to watch for entertainment right now, because we have movie theaters back open, are movies. And for those during the pandemic, they still were able to be entertained by movies. And if they were going to be critically acclaimed, then those movies, you have a chance to put front and center to get people engaged. But if there's a particular narrative that people really just don't want to be involved in or not really connected with, then you have to understand, if you're disconnected from your audience, then there's something wrong there. And that's the point that needs to be made. This is why the Oscars suffered. This is why we have the show tonight, where we're going to focus the first part about the show business struggle to overcome pandemic obstacles. And some of them are self-inflicted wounds. But are they going to do anything about that? And there were a lot of stories where the Oscars were criticized, and they were looked over, and they were criticized and analyzed very thoroughly. So we have a couple of stories that I'm going to go talk about with that. That'll make a good point. And then I also want to talk about, a couple of weeks ago we talked about the Warner Brothers CEO making changes so that the simultaneous releases of movies are not going to be happening in 2022. Well, Bob Iger, who was the head of Disney and Disney Plus, he was asked some comments about the position for Disney as a whole to go ahead and focus on streaming, the pivot to streaming, if you will. We're going to learn about that as well. And there's a couple other stories that are coming in on radio I want to talk about as well before we wrap things up, because there are some interesting stories. The other thing I also want to bring up as well, which is quite interesting, is in the journalism front, the New York Times retiring the term op-ed. We'll talk about that. And if I get some time, I'll talk about TikTok now influencing influencer marketing. We'll talk about that as well right here on the Broadcasters Podcast tonight. Thank you for listening in, finding the show as you always do, whether it be Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Spreaker, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, wherever you find it. You know we're there. And I hope you will please implore other people that you know that might be in the industry, that might be curious. If you're a radiophile like myself, if you're very interested in music, movies, TV, and radio, if there's stories that you think need to be covered and you'd like me to cover them on the program, by all means, please reach out to me. Email is kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. That's kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. Or look for me on any social media under King of Podcasts or on the website kingofpodcasts.com, and I have a contact form there. So let's go to the Oscars first. Vulture.com I want to take first. Flat out, the headline, the 2021 Oscars were the least watched ever. An average audience of approximately 10 million viewers. It was actually less than that, slightly less. Less than half of the viewership of the previous Oscar ceremony in 2020, which was seen by 23.6 million viewers in February of last year, so right before the pandemic. This rock-bottom performance will surprise absolutely nobody with even a passing knowledge of the TV industry. Observers had been predicting this plunge for months, both because of the overall trends of award showed ratings declines before and after the coronavirus hit, and as a result of unprecedented scenario in which most of the nominated movies were barely seen in actual theaters. That is correct. Because we had no idea of what movies were being awarded, or not have really paid attention to what movies were being nominated. We might have seen what was nominated and what would be awarded later. But what we didn't know is who got it. Because we didn't know the movies, because we didn't get a good chance as to access them. Now, all the award shows have suffered this year. Let's go through those numbers. The Grammys might have gotten great reviews, but still collapsed by 53% to 8.8 million music fans. NBC's mostly panned Golden Globes dropped 62%, 6.9 million viewers. And we do not know the final numbers from ABC. Well, at this time, they did not mention, but they had said that the estimate on the night of the event was 9.85 million viewers and a 1.9 rating among 18 to 49-year-old adults. Vulture wants to go ahead and make the justification that the Oscars performed as low as all the other award shows, but that is an ongoing problem. And I talked about that here on the Broadcasters Podcast a few weeks ago, after the Grammys had a bad performance in the ratings, and the same thing went for the Golden Globes. This is a problem. It's not, now they put a thing about here about how there are commentators that want to cite ratings drops as evidence that Hollywood is out of touch with America. No. There is, the celebrity is not being allowed to connect properly. But that's also at the behest of the protection, the security blanket that is the agencies, that are the managers, that are the publicists, that don't have a good control over what can be done with Zoom calls and with some of the things that have been done that have not helped at all. When you've had certain celebrities using TikTok to try to make themselves relevant and to keep themselves connected with their audience, and they don't know how to use social media properly. That's a lot of the big problems they have. And when they're not glammed up, we're not looking at them the way they would look on television or in a movie, and they're looking like everyday people. That hurts a lot. And then when you have people that are going on Zoom calls or going on the radio and they sound bad and they look bad and nobody's telling them, look, can we properly get you mic'd? Can we get you a good camera? Can we get you set up? And certain shows not bothering to do that because these are celebrities and we're just grateful to have the interview. Well, no, you don't have to be. Because we've already talked about on this show extensively about the amount of influencers that are out there and how well they are performing for everything. So the importance of celebrities is diminishing quickly. Now, what the industry in Hollywood needs to do, show business needs to go ahead and recover. They have to find a way to recover altogether, and this is what needs to happen for them. Because in a way, the Oscars didn't even feel like, from all the highlights I saw, it wasn't like everybody was necessarily having fun. There wasn't a lot of fun moments except for Glenn Close doing the butt. That's it. Like, what are the things that we have that were totally viral and interesting and organic and all of that? There wasn't. And that's the problem. And let's go through some of the stories that have talked about this week that have made the point. So, a couple of websites did make good claims, and they need to be called out about it. They need to be recognized. Quartz said in their headline, the Oscars failed its one job to make viewers interested in the movies. Now, we know that a significant prize, the first Asian woman to win the Best Director award, was Chloe Zhao, who won for her movie Nomadland, a drama about itinerant workers traveling the American West. Anthony Hopkins won a second Oscar for a performance of an elderly man with a dementia in The Father. Daniel Kaluuya took home a supporting actor award for his electric portrayal of Fred Hampton in Judas and the Black Messiah. But they mentioned that none of the films and their performances were highlighted during the broadcast. In fact, no aspect of the filmmaking process was given the light of day. Hardly any clips from the nominated movies were played. No music from the movies made it to the main broadcast. No costumes or hairstyles were shown. No cinematography to bask in. The Oscars gave viewers no sense whatsoever what movies looked like or sounded like over the past year. Deliberately. So filmmaker Steve Soderbergh and the Oscar producing team opted for a stripped-down, intimate broadcast and eschewed many of the ceremony's traditions, like montages, musical numbers, and comedic bits. Presenters waxed poetic about each of the nominees as they were announced, without actually showing the work that got them nominated. Speeches were allowed to run long, but without some audiovisual context of what they were there for, many fell flat. Then you have the fact that the movies that were out had short runs in theaters, limited locations, and little to no fanfare on on-demand or streaming services. So a movie like Promising Young Woman was the highest grossing Best Picture nominee with $12 million in global ticket sales. That's bad. And then a survey by the Hollywood research firm Guts Plus Data showed the majority of U.S. entertainment consumers had not heard of the films when prompted by their titles and shown their posters. Though many of the films might be more accessible than ever thanks to streaming, that doesn't necessarily translate to awareness of those movies. And it is. Because those kind of movies don't go viral. They need publicity. They need promotion in order for them to be noticed. That's what needs to happen here. And that did not happen this time around. The Oscars had a great opportunity to increase awareness of the movies, which all needed the help they could get. But the producers thought it was more important to experiment with the show's format, and they're probably not going to do that again. The show also failed to make a strong pitch for going back to movie theaters, which is also another point. Because some of these movies, I don't think they're even being shown. I don't know. There's not a whole lot of promotion for all these movies, and that's probably some cost-cutting measures by the studios for movies they didn't think they would make that much money, and when they don't have a place for people to go. That's what happens here. So a good point by Quartz on that. Another one, Variety.com made the point, do the Academy Awards need another makeover? Well, they need something. And this is where show business needs to basically take notice of what could be considered a bit of a crisis. A crisis of relatability to the audience, to the consumer. You know, there's going to be an easy thing where movies are going to be brought back now, and your blockbuster movies are going to be the ones that get the attention. But the ones that don't get this Oscar rub, the Oscar rub will be meaningless this year because no one watched the Oscars in the levels they normally did. And I can't tell you, among the Oscar winners, I can't tell you anything about the movies that were talked about. I know of Judas and the Black Messiah. I heard about Nomadland, but otherwise, everybody was talking about a number of things. Chloe Zhao, the fact that she is an Asian American or an Asian director. That's all well and good, but can we talk about her merits? Talk about the movie. Did anybody ever talk about her movie? All the Twitterati that I saw out there in show business talked about her and the fact she was Asian. That's all. Is that the only accomplishment she has? Is that she is of Asian descent? What about the movie? Point it out, sure. But what about the movie? I know nothing about Nomadland. I know nothing about this movie. And if you saw the Oscars, they didn't even show you a clip. So what else are you going to do about this? And did any of these stars or anyone go ahead and go on television anywhere else talking about this? Well, I wouldn't know because I don't pay attention to watching cable or network TV. So there were a bunch of critics and editors that talked to Variety about the debate about ways the movie industry's biggest night can be improved. One was Ramin Setudeh, and he said that the ceremony had a lot of hurdles to overcome. One common gripe about the Oscars is that a town that prides itself on entertaining the masses has lost its sense of fun when it comes to producing a telecast. Point made. We don't want a telecast to be somber and solemn and just, blah. We want excitement. We want passion. We want entertainment. These are entertainers. Entertain us. Why can't they do that on a telecast? Why was it so hard? So you have to think about that. And then, because relating to the audience, you just can't act like the pandemic's still going. How about we're on the way out of it? People are getting vaccinated. People are trying to get themselves back to normal everyday lives. Let's start working on the other side of the hill instead of acting like we're still all the way back to where we were. That's the other part, is that people need cautious optimism. That's a very important phrase. And that is something that really need to go ahead and put out going forward in everything that they do. Cautious optimism. Quit acting like the pandemic is still here and that we're in March and the stock market's gone to crap and everybody is dying. Let's stop all of that. We have parameters in place. People are starting to... Now, it's not everywhere that's perfect. We know that. You could come at me and talk about India all you want, a country of 1 billion people, and the issues that they're having right now because of variants and strains that are obviously affecting that nation, that subcontinent once again. I get that. But then, this is America. I mean, at least try to put on a happy face. At least try to entertain. Give us an escape, which is what the movies are meant to be. Which is why television has decided we're not going to keep doing the shows with the masks on and the pandemic feeling to it. We need to get back to where it is. All of our TV shows, we need studio audiences again. We need normalcy back on our programming because people are abandoning it for streaming. And as far as we're concerned, no matter how much money Netflix puts down, $17 billion coming up, they don't have to put out Oscar-worthy content. They just need to put out content and people will watch it. So those people you're losing because they're willing to take the lowest common denominator. They're willing to take on and binge watch a show because it's something new. Not that it might be good, but they'll take the risk because it's something new. And there's nothing nothing of escapism or entertainment or enlightenment or passion or enjoyment or any kind of positive emotion or really wonderful feelings that really resonates with what's going on in Hollywood and the Oscars. And it's been reflected over and over with all these events. The music industry did the same thing. The movie industry has done the same thing. Steven Soderbergh again, who is one of the veterans that produced the 93rd Academy Awards, felt like it had given up on putting on a show for the country at large, instead of opting for a self-important event program solely for those in the industry. Well, that means they're only entertaining the people in the room, not the audience watching at home. You have to be concerned with those watching at home. You do not relate to them, but you have to be able to put on the facade of relating to the audience watching at home. That definitely is not. They're in awe of the women in amazing gowns. If that's the other thing, the red carpet, all of that rigmarole that goes on. You know, I looked at some of the women that were there, and it's as if, look, if it's more important for having women or having men of diversity, equity, and inclusion important, then don't make the gowns and the whole glamour part of the ceremonies a big thing. Don't even bother with the red carpet then, if that's the case. Because some of the stars that you had that were in outfits, you just feel like they don't even look right being in these gowns and these suits and all. And their faces are so stoic and so solemn and so angry or, apathetic or just something weird. I looked it up for every picture there was. The one actress I saw was just beautiful and ravishing and just stood out to me was Zendaya in the yellow dress. Just beautiful. But you can't, just a beautiful woman, just what just comes down to. And even with the Oscar or in the Grammys, you have the musical artists that are glam to the nines and they're showing a good face and at least putting out music that has some kind of emotion. They're not acting solemn and quiet. It's as if we're like at a funeral. Who wants that? Now, the Grammys sank on the ratings this year, but at least they had Taylor Swift, Beyonce, Dua Lipa, Harry Styles, Megan Thee Stallion. The Grammys were at least thrilling to watch. And Soderbergh could have definitely wrapped in and brought in a cadre of actors and actresses that could have gone on board. Julia Roberts, George Clooney, Matt Damon, Channing Tatum, Meryl Streep, Jennifer Lopez. A-listers. Major stars. A Valentine to movie making. And the Oscars should have reminded millions of vaccinated Americans why they should be excited to be able to return to the communal experience of going to the movies. No. And that right there was said. Janelle Riley, another critic, also mentioned that this award season was all the pre-recorded acceptance speeches we had to suffer through. While wanting to avoid a disaster like Daniel Kaluuya being muted for the first part of his Globe speech, having all the nominees pre-record their thank yous in case they won doesn't work. And they were hedging their bets in case they didn't win. And you're not getting that complete shock, elation, joy when their names are called. A couple weeks ago, I was watching through some things, some of the showbiz stuff, and there used to be the soap opera awards. And I still remember, what was it, Shamar Moore, after what was it, like 14 years or something like that, that Susan Lucci was being snubbed for Best Actress in a soap opera. In a series, and it was like the streak is over. Susan Lucci, All My Children, it just the emotion from her, just in tears of joy and excitement. I remember watching that live, and man, was that good! I was like, wow, and I felt so good for her because I used to watch that show growing up as a kid, and you've been on that show, you've been working that show almost 25 years at that point. She started with the show in 1970 when it first came on. And to get that feeling, to get that historic moment, and for it to happen, it was just so natural. It was so good. I mean, how can you not love that woman? And how can you not love that acceptance speech? And just love that she got the win. Finally got the win after all this time. Something special. Now, Janelle here says, at least the Oscars went with a live show and took some risks. And there were so many wonderful films and artists that were honored. But that she also liked the Oscars didn't cost the speeches. And she mentioned Daniel Kaluuya rambling about his parents having sex if he only had 60 seconds. And then there were others. Thomas Vinterberg's heartfelt tribute to his late daughter. Another critic, Brett Lang, talked about how there are movies that could have been strong contenders in non-pandemic times. Nomadland did deserve the prize, but there were art house films that failed to tap into the zeitgeist, partly because they didn't enjoy a theatrical traditional rollout and didn't benefit from the level of press coverage and attention that kind of distribution can make. Streaming services like Netflix or Hulu may be upending the film business, but they offer up such an endless ocean of content that much of it can seem ephemeral, which I think is part of the problem. It's hard to turn streaming movies into events. This year's telecast really suffered from a lack of any blockbuster nominees like a Joker or Gravity, the type of movie that most viewers see, enjoy, have a rooting interest in seeing triumph. Correct. Now, there's much more that go into this, but I'll leave the link on the description. Just go ahead and look for all that as you look for the show at broadcasterspodcast.com. You can find it there, and I'll put that out there for all of you. And finally, one more story to go ahead and bring up on the Oscars, and the whole issue that they're going through was you can't manufacture an Oscars moment. This comes from the Geeky Airy. It's a website I have not seen yet, but an interesting point. So in the Oscars' 93-year history, they mentioned a number of historic wins, Sidney Poitier being the first black man to win Best Actor, accepted speeches from the likes of Cuba Gooding Jr., defiantly continuing his speech over the playoff music, Marlon Brando sending Apache actress and activist Littlefeather to accept his award, the Errors, the La La Land debacle, or John Travolta absolutely mangling Idina Menzel's name, or even Streakers, but all these moments have been a result of the fact that the Oscars are live and unscripted, a night of tremendous emotion for many people, and a chance for people with large platforms to make a stand. You can't manufacture that, and the Oscars were trying that. The show was said to be emphasized as an homage to movies, and it tried to be. And this story says that the night was about as untraditional as an Oscar ceremony can get. In addition to the whole no hosting, the ceremony being held in Union Station with a reduced capacity crowd, there were almost no cringy in-between bits. Nominees were introduced with personal tidbits rather than film clips. And there was no playoff music for speeches that ran over. The categories were read out of order. And most notably, the top two acting categories were reserved for last and not Best Picture. Then there were some snubs. They talked about Chadwick Boseman not winning the coveted Best Actor statue for his role in Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, his final performance. He did win at the Golden Globes and the SAGs. So this writer mentions they missed the clips and introducing the nominees. What's the point if you can't see what a particular individual film was nominated for that category for? When film releases were so chaotic in the first place. Some of the introductions seem a little self-congratulatory. The person started as an assistant and now nominated for an Oscar. Great. I know that's meant to be motivating. You too can win an Oscar. But the truth is, this is an exception and not the rule. And a failure to recognize this is one of the main reasons why the Oscars remain out of touch. These moments clearly meant to humanize the nominees, dragged, and made the ceremony feel much longer than it was. Wow. Yeah. Not the kind of feedback that the Oscars needed, especially when you have Hollywood trying to make a comeback now and the movie business is back up and moving, at least in some way, shape, or form. And there are going to be some significant movies that are going to be making their way onto theaters. Will some of these Oscar-nominated flicks be given a chance to be seen out there is the question. I don't know. But when I look at what's being held out right now on the weekend chart, I can tell you that most of those movies most likely were not out in the theaters. Mortal Kombat right now is holding best. That grossed $23.3 million. Demon Slayer the Movie, an anime flick, $22.78 million dollars. 1,600 screens, by the way, over 3,000 screens for Mortal Kombat. Nobody still putting in money, $21 million domestic. Ryan the Last Dragon. None of those movies were being talked about in the Oscar conversation. So keep that all in mind. These are the kind of things that are happening now. And this is why Hollywood, more important than ever, they need to recover from this. They need to go back to the way it was as quickly as they can. They are losing out to the streamers. They are losing out their audience because they're starting to not even cut the cord, but they're starting to lose interest. And by the way, just a little point, even if there is a political slant on things, why would you want to alienate that audience that's going to be paying money for movies? Some of these movies, people don't care about the politics that you have. So why even alienate? And why even make it that point? It should be about merit. It should be about appreciation, a fondness, and gratitude for those that are making some great movies out there, and not letting them be lost in the mix, which is what they'll be. Basically, they'll just be movies that'll be dropped somewhere in the deep abyss of Netflix movies. Is that a good idea? So that's what I wanted to say about that. Let's go and move along into streaming versus the big corporate media giants. This time around, we're going to go and focus on Disney and Disney Plus, and Bob Iger, who is now leading the front here. You talked to Itan Vessing at Hollywood Reporter. We'll talk about this story real quick. And overall, Bob Iger's thoughts about the pivot before and during the pandemic from its legacy theatrical movie and TV business to a growing focus on the streaming space with Disney Plus and other digital platforms. He says, quote, "It all worked out, and it worked out great." He said Disney Plus and the studio's shift to the direct-to-consumer space was perilous in terms of having to execute on new digital streaming technology, ensuring enough monthly subscribers sign up, and offering consumers an entirely new slate of original content. The move from, he says, essentially traditional forms of distribution, whether from movies or television shows from linear channels, cable and satellite, to Disney Plus and Hulu and ESPN Plus, was a tremendous risk. Quote, "People have gotten a lot more comfortable watching movies and television shows in their homes, particularly using new technology to do so. For the most part, that's good for our business." And that's certainly one example of a disruption that was beginning, then hastened, and will probably be here to stay. No, well, you're catching up on the back end there, Bob. Let's just be honest there. So fine that you make the point here, but it doesn't take away the fact that all this is going on and that you relate to the game. And there are some things that you're doing right now that will not necessarily do well when it comes to putting movies out and saying, oh, we're going to just charge an extra premium, unlike what's going on with HBO Max. The Warner Brothers movies are being simulcast for 30 days on HBO Max as part of the $15 subscription rate. Meanwhile, people are paying Disney Plus for what, $8.99 I think it is now? And what, $15 for the entire Netflix, Hulu, ESPN package? So Disney, Hulu, ESPN package. So there's that to talk about. Now, another story that's got to be talked about, Variety.com spoke about this, and I didn't talk about it too much, but Netflix is spending fiscal 2021 $17 billion in content. Remember when I complained that was a lot of money to spend because I didn't know if they were going to make their money back? Well, we know now they're going to make their money back. The pandemic has made that point. Now, one of the things I've got to make mention of as well is that we had a lot of big studios that decided not to put out movies in 2020 that would have been reflective of the Oscar season this year. And so I also have to keep that in mind as well. And we understand there's a bit of a past that can be said about the Oscars in the first place. That's fine. But that can't just be everything. And then the movie theaters, well, actually, the big studios, I mean, there were certain movies they could have put out in some way, shape, or form. If they needed to get put out in streaming or somewhere else, somehow, and not let them hold back, because we already know that the movie season next year, and especially 2022, is going to be cramped because there's a lot of big movies that will be coming out next year that will be in simultaneous mode. We're going to get such an influx of movies coming up. We won't have any more issues with strikes or any more labor disputes because it looks like that's all been resolved in some way, shape, or form in some ridiculous way now. It's not even as uniform as it once was. But what we have now is a lot of movies will be coming out because they need to be pushed out because they need to make their money. The money that was already invested. Those movies that were being held back, they all need to get pushed out as much as they can. I'm actually surprised that some movies have not made it into the 2021 schedule as of yet, because some movies are already making money again. Maybe it's time to get some movies and push them back up the calendar. If you can. If it's possible. I wouldn't see why they couldn't. Especially during the summer or the winter or the fall. They could be doing things like that. And I know certain movies are not going to get pushed back up, but I think certain movies should, if there's a way to do that. Now, Netflix has revealed they're going to spend over $17 billion in content this year. Production delays from COVID-19 in 2020 will lead to a 2021 slate that is more heavily second half weighted on a large number of returning franchises. And while the rollout of vaccines is very uneven across the world, we are back up and producing safely in every major market, with the exception of Brazil and India. And we'll spend over $17 billion in cash on content this year and deliver an amazing range of titles for our members, with more originals this year than last. 2020, they spent $11.8 billion. We're going to spend $17 billion. And then the year before, 2019, they spent $13.9 billion. And in their first quarter, the level of shows and the audiences are getting for it. Listen to this. Firefly Lane's first season, 49 million households in the first 28 days of the series, of the service being released. Season 3, Cobra Kai, 45 million viewers. Fate, the Wink Saga, 57 million viewers. City in Georgia, 52 million viewers. And they had others that really did a lot for movies. Outside the Wire got 66 million viewers. Yes Day, 62 million. I Care a Lot, 56 million. And To All the Boys I've Loved Before, 51 million viewers. Whew. Network and cable are dreaming of those audiences. And imagine if those movies went to theaters and how much money that could have been made off of those. Because Netflix is forking up all that money as a movie studio or a TV studio to get all this content created for them exclusively. And these studios are missing out. That's a lot of money for streaming to be able to go ahead and put out, compared to how much the movie studios are probably be able to put out themselves in their traditional format. It's very interesting altogether. Okay, we're going to move along now into radio. No, actually, I'm going to move on. I'll leave radio for last. I want to go and talk about New York Times. Now, this story, it makes sense why, but it is very significant about how this might reflect the rest of the news industry in general. And I don't talk much about news much anymore because I'm just gotten tired of it. As you know, I gave myself a New Year's resolution to not talk about news or politics, or just watch it all together and consume it. I'm just not interested anymore. It's just not there for me. Because the approach that's being done by news now, it's failing everybody for the most part. And local news has very little influence or very little direction anymore. They're being controlled by their bidders as to what they're allowed to go ahead and program more than ever. There's more national news that's being put on local news than ever, and more Associated Press is out there for local newspapers and still be able to go and report on local stories. And less reporters, less resources, less money to go and put out there. So the New York Times recently announced your opinion section will no longer use the term op-ed. Outside opinion contributions will be labeled as guest essays instead. Opinion editor Katie Kingsbury, described the label as a holdover from print newspaper design, referring to opinions published on the opposite page as editorials, as clubby newspaper jargon. The term is outdated and worse, can confuse and alienate readers. Editorials will still be called editorials, but the articles written by outside writers will be known going forward as guest essays. And that title will appear prominently above the headline. In an era of distrust in the media and confusion over what journalism is, I believe institutions, even ones with a lot of esteemed traditions, better serve their audiences with direct, clear language. We don't like jargon in our articles. We don't want it above them either. But then calling them guest essays takes away the fact that these are opinionated. And that's what it comes from. Now, the Times tested the labeling outside opinion contributions as guest stations with readers, and the readers were happy with the results. So, I think but the problem is, they don't want to tag anything op-ed anymore because, let's be honest, quite a bit of the news that's reported right now from the Times and other publications include some opinionated terms, opinionated phrases, or some kind of a bias towards what's being reported. In case of the writer not having an interest of the story or having some kind of a bias towards the subject you're reporting on. And I understand that part, but it's because objectivity is not something that's being considered as much as it once was. But everybody knows that now. I mean, you don't go to the New York Times or other newspapers for just objectivity. No, you're not going to get just the story, just the facts. You're going to get a lot of information that might be brought on that will follow a particular motive, a particular narrative. And it's nothing wrong with them to go ahead and make the change here. We're not complaining about that. We're just saying, just be honest with your readers. And just say now, yeah, clarity, tag pieces that you are. Or just basically say that you are a publication that does provide opinions within your news. You're an opinionated newspaper. You're a newspaper with a conscience. You're a newspaper with a point of view. And there are cases where your point of view will be noted. And your point of view is that of your readers. That's a pretty honest and fair statement. You could just do that. Because you shouldn't put the wool over the eyes of people that might not be aware of the intentions or the bias that a newspaper might have. Let's just be honest, there is out there. Let's quit acting like there's not. It's okay if you do that. I'd just rather you make the point and say, yes, this is of a particular slant. And their opinions being brought in the piece. I mean, basically just put a disclaimer out there that says you're going to do that. And we're not responsible for our writers. We want to offer the most accurate content possible, but we are going to add some additional information that we feel that our writers feel is crucial, or the publishers or the editors-in-chief feel are crucial to the story that need to be made mention of that goes along with their narrative. I'd much prefer if they did that. And then there could be, if there's going to be room for anybody out there that can do objective, well, there's not. We've heard about News Nation, Next Gen Media, or what was WGN America. They've converted that into a total news channel. It's supposed to be being objective, and they're losing money, and they're not doing well. But that's because of the fact that in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, news is no longer anything that people really worry about. People will get their news in certain ways through social media or other places, but they're not going to get it from a news source. Nobody's going to one newspaper, one publication to learn about the news. And as we always talk about, I don't even bother looking at news or politics from any point because it's too much to decode and decrypt. I mean, really, to go ahead and try to strip a story down to what the real facts are, it's just too time consuming. It's too much work, and I don't want to do that anymore. And I got tired of it. All I need to do was the headline, what it is, and just show me the pictures, show me the proof, give me the raw materials because that's what we want online. Just give us that. Don't abbreviate, don't abridge it for us. Don't try to make it something that is easy to consume. We don't want that anymore. Okay, if you want a press conference, let us watch the whole thing live, uninterrupted. If you have any documents talking about any particular case, court cases, we want to watch the court case. If we see stories that happen, show us the pictures. Otherwise, don't show us anything else. Don't tell us about it, and don't come into us with some sanctimonious voice, sound like you're Deborah Norville from Inside Edition, and reporting as such, because really, when you hear the voices on the news, it sounds like Inside Edition, a hard copy for the 1990s, Current Affair, those kind of shows. That's what the news has become. Those shows we used to call tabloid shows. And that's what our news is now. It is tabloidistic. There's not even a question about that anymore. It's very clear. And most of the people that either could try to consume the media, they realize that. They know there's a bias going on. They know there's a slant that's being put in, a narrative that's being put into place, and then you have to go ahead and work yourself around it. Some people want to watch one side of the narrative or listen or read the one side of the narrative, so they'll go to somebody that will follow and they will aggregate those stories as such. And then there are others, it'll be one way or the other in the middle, whatever. Or there are websites that will aggregate and will show you, okay, this is what we think is left, this is what we think is right, this is what we think is probably in the center of opinion, and they'll put it out like that. And you don't even know I want to read either, because it's not, the aggregators, thank you for pointing that out for us, but we want the stories and the information just written out as raw and as unedited as possible. Just give us everything that's out there and let people review it. And honestly, let the independent journalists that want to go through the trouble of researching and finding what's in the story, because we don't need people to be journalists. We want the journalists to be researchers and basically just find the facts, be investigative. Investigate and find out what they have uncovered from what they have read, what they have consumed, what they have found out. That's all people want now these days in their journalism. We want investigators. We want people that are going to find the facts and just report the facts straight up without any other information. That's all we want. That's all that's necessary. It's not exciting. It's not sexy. It doesn't make money. But if the model to make money can continue, they're going to keep doing that. But then the Substacks of the world and other places are going to come out, and people are going to realize, oh, you know what? The news, the way it's been portrayed, is going to start going away. And when we talk about network and cable television, when we have live sports, live news is very important. And if people continue to abandon live news and live sports, not so much. There's still quite a bit of an audience there. But if live sports were to wane altogether, then that would be a big problem. But the sports franchises are still very strong, and there's a lot of money being spent on them. As for live news, if people can't like or trust the people that they're listening to or watching or reading, they're going to abandon them. And I would be remiss if, much like Hollywood, if Washington, D.C., New York, Los Angeles, all the major media outlets, if they don't realize that they can become extinct as well. And Substack might be the new way to go. And Google, Facebook, Twitter could be the new news aggregators, and people will go there. And they will eliminate the need for this traditional style of news reporting and journalism that we've been accustomed to. We know newspapers are going away. We know magazines are going away too. They'll be in digital form, if anything. But then after that, what's going to happen? They will become extinct. And we will be looking at our news in a different way. And it will not be a one-stop shop for news. We might be able to find everything in one particular browser. Maybe not a particular website. I mean, for me, I have to go to multiple websites for all the stories I look for. A lot of times I will use the Google news aggregator that will personally take the algorithm that they have so I can find out what's for me to read about that I want to read about, and I can curate it as such. Because people want that kind of approach. They want to be able to curate the stories they want to read about. They want to be able to go in and look at the stories they want to read about and cut through the bullshit. That's what we all want. That's what we expect. That's what we would deserve overall. So maybe they're going to figure that out someday. Now, remember last week I was talking about the issues when it came to of the Associated Press report about people trusting in the news? Well, Tom Rosenstiel wrote in the CJR about this particular story, so we got to talk about that. So the Columbia Journalism Review's Tom Rosenstiel, here's what we have that's being said about this. So one of the things he talked about when he talked about working with AP and NORC, doing a study called My Media, the Media, and he found a think tank called the Project for Excellence in Journalism, becoming part of the Pew Research Center. He says that there were two big things that were discovered. One, when you ask people about the media, they usually think of cable news, often of media that they're irritated by. Two, if you ask them about the media they use most often, their answers to most questions go up in cases by about double. The numbers still aren't great. They aren't what they might have been 30 years ago, but they were a lot better. When asked people about what media they use most often, it's usually more local. Even diminished. Local TV news is a major player, though not for people under 40. And then he talked about the journalism of affirmation. The diminution of local news and local news outlets, that's a huge issue. The decline of local news, I believe, is a factor of polarization. It normalizes our debates. So one of the comments that were made, and we've heard panic porn by the likes of Bill Maher on his program, but he talked about the idea of mistrust porn. And it suggests some kind of piling on with the idea that the press is unpopular because it will get you attention. I think what we're trying to do is the opposite of that. We were trying to see if there was a new way of understanding this issue, an issue that seems stuck and intractable. Your bias, says the critics. Am not, say journalists. Liar, say the critics. No, you just don't understand me, say the journalists. Maybe all you really want is propaganda anyway, not real journalism. That argument isn't going anywhere. We need a breakthrough to get past it. And he's absolutely right. If there is what is meant by porn, too much repetitive work, that's something he does see. And the studies that he's done, the doors we're trying to open really represent the opposite of that. Very much the opposite of that. So that's good information there altogether. And keep that all in mind. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about. Let's go ahead and also bring up the story of TikTok now influencing influencer marketing. Let's talk about that, and then I'll go into radio after that. Haley Trucali and Media Post talks about now that influencer marketing is having a moment at TikTok, permeating culture at the speed of light, and it has supplanted TV's place in the center of the media ecosystem. We've talked about how people under the age of 40, Gen Z and millennials, are watching more TikTok than they are television. Now, I actually brought that up over on my When I'm Not Podcasting series. Go ahead and look for that episode. You can look for it now published at When I'm Not Podcasting. Look for that wherever you find your podcasts, or look for the link over at kingofpodcasts.com. And also there's a link for it on broadcasterspodcast.com. Part of TikTok's appeal is the discoverability of something new. Upon logging in, users are greeted with an assortment of new accounts, often ones that fit with the niches you might have not gone looking for otherwise. The idea of selling out as a worrisome influence on TikTok. People have seen previous endorser platforms peter out and prove that commodifying such influence is distasteful to many. Instagram may be an exception to the rule. It draws 22% of Facebook's revenues. But the Wall Street Journal says it still remains a hot spot for traditional influencer marketing. If there's a formula to success on TikTok, it's ordinary people who know how to add entertainment value to their postings. Something that show business is lacking. Instead, they have to go back to the drawing board and recreate and rehaul and reimagine what they've already done over 100 years. There's no doubt there's awareness among consumers and influencers. Over the years, this type of social activity has bred cynicism among the public. Similarly, influencers have to be on their guard as well, remaining selective about the companies and causes they partner with. The brand side influencer work that attracts the biggest audiences is deeply collaborative between creative agencies and influencers. The personalities have a strong sense of what will bring entertainment and value to their followers, and marketers have the strength to build the idea for broader appeal. The agency's responsibility is to help build a message and oversee communications to ensure that messaging adheres to an overall brand positioning. Working together, both can anticipate what their audiences want to see next and provide value to the communication. By leaning into TikTok's unique discoverability functionality, brands can broaden who they consider an influencer and bring them along in the creative process. All important points. And people are realizing how much more we're getting out of TikTok and how much of an advertising, a music influence, of a entertainment influence in general, and how much things we come out with viral more than ever. So point your fingers at your arm as if you're showing you have ice in your veins and go, sheesh. Okay? That's where we are. A couple other stories I want to talk about before we can wrap things up. There's a couple of radio stories I'm going to go ahead and hold on to and talk about later. But one story I do want to talk about before I wrap things up, and I'm going to take a couple of stories that I have and put them on when I'm not podcasting and talk about it there. But one story that actually caught my attention was a story about one of the legendary radio stations that has been around for over 100 years, as a matter of fact. Or the fact that radio has been around for 100 years. And the way that a station was able to go ahead and get themselves on board and to help be part of revolutionizing the way radio was being consumed. Something that's got to be talked about right now more than ever. Because radio needs to find their way back somewhere out of all that's going on. And that's what's going on here. So KHJ, 9:30 a.m. or 93 KHJ, and the Boss Radio format. This is something as an example of something that needs to happen back once again to radio to get it back in good graces. So this is one of LA's oldest radio stations dating back to 1922. And they had put themselves together May 5th, 1965. Now, KHJ was coming onto the market, and they were going to get some heavy top 40 competition. At the time in 1965, the likes of KFWB, 980 AM, and the original KRLA, which is now KRDC, 1110 AM. The people that were in charge there at KHJ was station manager Ken Devaney, programmer Ron James, and legendary top 40 consultants Bill Drake and Gene Chenault. Drake and Chenault battled it out at previous radio stations in smaller cities, honing their craft. New DJs included morning man Robert W. Morgan, afternoon legend The Real Don Steele. If you watched Once Upon a Time in Hollywood and you heard the radio station that was being played in Brad Pitt's car, then you'll know what I'm talking about. A week before the plan launched, new morning man Robert W. Morgan happened to tune in the KFWB, heard things he should not have been hearing, like the term boss radio, a slogan invented for and by KHJ with other KHJ ideas. So a KHJ employee thought he was going to be fired and went to KFWB, as the story goes, with the information in order to land a job there. As its time as a top 40 radio station, KHJ was huge. 1965 copied its stations from coast to coast, ending big with the last true top 40 programmer, Chuck Martin, brought back much of the station's glory and ratings right before RKO made a horrendous decision to take the station country in November 1980. 15 years you had that. It was wonderful. Now, there's a lot of people that went ahead and commented about KHD and coming back. It was wonderful. And the way that station was put together, I'm telling you, go look for 930 KHJ and take a listen to what that station sounded like. And the kind of programming that was out there. The excitement, the enthusiasm, the contests, and the people that were behind the microphone that introduced songs and a style of music to Los Angeles that was so different. It was such a different time. And that is what changes here. And that's what it comes down to. Another story I want to take some time to talk about, which will probably be on my When I'm Not Podcasting channel, is what happens when you run out of hits. And that Netflix is supposedly running out of hit shows, according to Fred Jacobs. And that the same correlation could be said about the music industry. Even though streaming services have continued to increase by more than 15 million in 2020 for services like Spotify and Amazon Music. And revenue went up 9%, north of $12 billion last year. So they're not hurting. But the music market is now a catalog product. Hits Daily Double says that gold, which is recurrent songs that have been played in the last year to 5 years, it's not a lot of new music, is consuming 2/3 of the market, projected to run even higher in Q1 of this year. So whether you're running a subscription streaming video platform or contemporary music station, a lack of new hits. It's a problem for the music industry and by extension radio. Every form of mass pop culture and art needs to feed the beast in order to become and remain mass appeal. Same thing with new hits. TV cannot survive on programming featuring the same poor people. And the data also suggests there's data that they have talking about there's a music drought in terms of emerging successful mass market artists and songs breaking through. But remember, this is why there's a lot of new music coming out. Just because it's not as popular or as easily distinguishable or recognizable as there once was, European stations don't have that problem. Stations around the world don't have this problem. It's America that's afraid of trying something new. They want to try something that's tried and true, and there are only certain artists they guarantee feel like we're going to bring out hits that will automatically deliver. Tonight I heard the song Your Power by Billie Eilish, and that got pushed to mainstream radio stations overnight. Tonight. So I'm hearing it on other stations around the country. Fine. When Post Malone puts out song after song, same thing for him. If Drake does the same thing, there's him too. Actually, not so much Drake. Drake is more of a streaming artist than he is for songs that he has that are going to be pop friendly. Some of his R&B friendly stuff will not go right through hit radio. Ariana Grande, guarantee it. Taylor Swift, guarantee it. Justin Bieber, guarantee it. Bruno Mars, guarantee it. There's just certain artists that the radio industry is going to trust to play. But they're going to be late to the game for other artists. They always are. And this is where they need to quit worrying about trying to find hits that are going to be coming manufactured or are going to become relevant overnight that they could just easily just latch onto. They need to be the place to discover new hits, which is what it used to be. Take the Billboard Hot 100, quit using the media base and the methodology to continue to change, and start looking at what people are actually listening to on streaming and start following along. That's how simple it is. Maybe radio will learn someday. I don't know. But we'll keep it there. Maybe we'll just keep an eye on it, and I'll keep listening around to all these different radio stations and see what happens. And maybe cut some of those commercials out because we don't need them either. Anyway, thank you for listening in. As always, I really appreciate you taking time out. By the way, I finished up an NFL draft party early to make sure I got home so I can record this podcast for all of you tonight. For those of you that are interested in listening to this program, I made the extra effort to make sure I was here with enough time to get this show prepared to go ahead and record it tonight for all of you, and I really appreciate you checking it out. So come back for another Broadcasters podcast next week, and until then, remember the content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.